Happy Bicycle Day, everybody. Uh, I just noticed today, decided I had to do a stream. I've been kind of taking some time off. I just discovered I have another pretty serious health problem, which is not fun. And also, I realized um, something about an old situation that has really had me going through it. I've been processing that. So I haven't really felt much like chatting, but I can't miss Bicycle Day. And tomorrow, I'm doing a music stream. Make sure you check that out. I rescheduled the Bob Weir situation for I think Wednesday of next week, and I'm glad I did that because a lot more stuff has come to light, and that's probably going to continue over the next few days. It's going to be a hell of a story, though, so don't miss that. And so, Albert Hoffman, experimenting with ergot alkaloids, trying to find a vasoconstrictor that's safe so that it could be used during pregnancy to reduce bleeding and also to treat migraines. And so he set it on a shelf for, let's see, 1938 to 1943, 5 years or whatever. What did I say, 38 to 43? Yeah, 5 years. And here's where the story gets a little weird. He claimed that he spilled some on his hand, and that is actually a myth that LSD absorbs through skin. It will absorb through membranes, like under your tongue or in your nose, vajayjay. Hold on a second. Okay, so it can absorb through the skin, and if it's extremely pure and there's a huge quantity of it. But the idea that he got a drop on his hand or something and had a trip doesn't add up. And this is fodder for the conspiracy theorists, right? Because a lot of people claim that LSD is some CIA psyop. I have never once had one of these people give me a good kibono, right? Like how would they benefit from distributing a compound that would undo potentially their billions and billions of dollars of indoctrination, the propaganda integration that people experience, right? It doesn't make any sense at all. And some right wingers say, well, it gives you liberal values or whatever, and that's great, in my opinion. The problem is when any type of value gets politicized and weaponized, which has happened with a lot of liberal values. So, point being, I don't really see why that would make sense to anyone. A compound that frees you from your indoctrination, that allows you to see beyond the matrix smoke screen, it doesn't add up. But I have to admit, I'm a little bit sketched out by Hoffman's weird story. So anyways, that's what he said, and he had a very mild experience, so he went back and he took an amount that he thought would be very tiny, because at the time there was nothing known that was active in the microgram range. So he rode his bike home, and he experienced phantasmagoric phantasms, and his description of it was extremely elegant, poetic, very beautiful. And he was a tiny little man, and he seemed to me, I didn't know him, but he came off as extremely sweet, elfish. He believed that LSD, the molecule, had actually chosen him, that LSD was intelligent and conscious, that it basically was a spirit, a concrescence of divinity. And I wouldn't argue with that fact. I think that LSD is one of the most important compounds. It's one of the most important developments in the history of humanity. And its emergence at the time that it came couldn't have been more serendipitous, right? The law of necessity. To me, human inventions are basically evolutionary adaptations, right? And this time around, we have ayahuasca and DMT as being more prevalent, and there's good reason for that. These compounds focus more on, well, ayahuasca in particular, the emotional damage that generations raised by narcissist boomers, for example, we need that kind of therapeutic assistance. And also, in the case of DMT, people don't have 12 hours for LSD. So they're able to experience that transcendental dimension without committing as much time to it. But we're getting off the subject of LSD. People probably don't generally give LSD enough credit in terms of the actual impact that it's had on our culture. Let me check the chat and make sure. Internet's lagging. Uh-oh. I checked all my settings before I got on. Hold on, let me see if I can fix it. I hate that. Okay, that's good. No, everything's correct. Let me see. Hola, hola. Oh, is it my mic cable? Is that better? I think that's better. Sorry, guys. Here, I'll leave my headphones on. I will go. Yeah, it's my cable. Sorry, guys. I will go to Cusco on Monday and get another cable. So where were we? I was just starting to hit my stride and get get to some kind of point. Yeah, the cultural impact of LSD. I mean, I'm sure most of you guys watching my channel don't really need to be told this, but I'll tell you anyways. I cannot imagine what the world would look like without LSD, Dr. Timothy Leary, and particularly the Grateful Dead, which might sound crazy to some people. But really, that torch of this sort of psychedelic consciousness would have disappeared if it wasn't for the Grateful Dead over the course of, I think, the 80s or 90s. They were kind of like keeping that flame going. And the concerts were so massive, 80,000 people a night, and oftentimes band and audience were on LSD, and there would be this sort of group mind thing that would evolve. And yeah, and their sound man, actually, Augustus Stanley Owsley III, made most of the LSD that was consumed in the 1960s, and he was quite the character. He believed that vegetables were poisonous, and he actually funded the band for a long time. He would only let them eat steak and drink milk. And they said that there was LSD crystals like on the refrigerator handle. There was this like dust in the house everywhere. And they pretty much consumed it constantly for a solid 2-year period. That was like their training. And Bob Weir was only 16 when this started. So it's remarkable. And it's also a testament to the fact that a lot of what people say about LSD isn't true. In terms of brain damage, it actually does the opposite. Neuroplasticity and neurogenesis are enhanced or catalyzed more than any other psychedelic, actually, the natural ones, both in situ and in vitro. So for memory enhancement and actually IQ increase, in most people, it's pretty small, incremental, but there have been a couple of clinical cases where people have gone from having a average to below average IQ to literal genius. And my theory about that is probably that they had some sort of psychological block that was removed, but still, and then also that it makes you insane. It turns out that unless you're predisposed to mental illness, there's really no risk of that. So, where were we going with this, though? The cultural transformation and the impact of it. Absolutely tremendous. You know, if you ever seen Leave It to Beaver, like an old 1950s television, I imagine that that's what the entire world would be. You know, if you listen to the Beatles, like prior to LSD, they're like a boy band, basically. And then they take acid and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and all of these more sophisticated. And it's interesting too that these artworks kind of disprove a lot of the myths about LSD, because the spaced out hippie thing, if you look at the Beatles catalog, their music actually became significantly more sophisticated after taking LSD. And one of the miracles of it really is that it engages the brain in such a way that there's electrical activity in parts of the brain where there never is any otherwise, even in the case of master meditators. There have been studies with brain scans, and it's true that even, you know, a meditating monk does not have electrical activity in these parts of the brain where, you know, LSD and psilocybin, I guess, activate it. My suspicion about that also is that the how do you say, parapsychological phenomena that people experience on psychedelics, you know, it often gets written off because people say, oh yeah, sure, you guys were telepathic, you were high on psychedelics, stupid, you know. No, for sure, 100%. Psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD, all of these things can open the doorway to precognitions and telepathic experiences. And I suspect that the electrical activity in those areas of the brain, you know, that's where those processes are governed, I guess, or, you know, where they reside. So let me check back in with the chat. I hope I'm not still crackling too badly. All right. So let's see the history, the mythology. Okay, here's a bit of history that is extremely important and probably not that well. Hold on. Probably not that well known. Is that better? Yeah, I think it worked. Nice. There were certain mystery schools in Greece and Babylonia and Syria and Egypt. And in the Eleusinian mysteries, there was a beverage called the kykeon. And the inner circle, the apoptiae, consumed this beverage. And as is this, you know, current model or protocol for hermetic secret societies, there was an outer order and an inner order. And the outer order had not partaken of the kykeon. And the inner order, the apoptiae, had. And it was a major compliment, I guess. It was an honor. You know, it was like a big deal if you're allowed to drink from the kykeon. And Hoffman theorized that it was ergot fungus, that they had brewed a beer from the ergot fungus. He actually did this and was successful. The thing is, he went through kind of a lengthy preparation phase, and he was a chemist. Ergot fungus, if you do not extract the alkaloids, and LSD is semi-synthetic, right? So it's basically like there's a skeleton and the chemist has to fill in some holes. So it's, you know, it's not entirely natural, but semi-synthetic. If you consume the ergot fungus without going through this process, you will die, but it's worse than that. You get gangrene-like symptoms. Your flesh will rot, you go insane. It's a terrible way to die, and I do not see experimentation. You know what I mean? They're not going to experiment with this past the first guy that consumes it, and they watch his like arms rot off, and he's, you know, insane and dying. So I don't think that's the case. My sleuthing has suggested to me that it was actually acacia rue that grows in all of those places, right? So all of the major centers of the mysteries, the Elizinian mysteries, the acacia and rue plants both exist. I guess that doesn't really have a hell of a lot to do with LSD unless Hoffman's right. But my point is, in terms, we're talking just generally about psychedelics now, I guess, as catalysts of culture. Oh my God, this is bad. Sorry, guys. If you look at the old records, right? Pythagoras, member of the mystery schools, hella innovative. He, for example, gave us the ratios that make the modern Western musical system. The Pythagorean theorem actually is connected to older mystery schools because in Babylonia they found a cuneiform tablet that has the Pythagorean theorem from 3,000 years earlier. So it's evidence of this knowledge being passed down through the mystery schools. Point being, though, it wasn't Plato, was it Empedocles or somebody that conceived of the atom? That was also a mystery school adept, you know? So Aristotle, all of these people that are considered progenitors of, you know, modern arithmetic and geometry and political systems and philosophy and all of these things, they were all people that had taken initiation in these mystery schools. And if you look at their work, they were catapulted far beyond most of their contemporaries and remained so, you know, until pretty recently. You could even argue that we don't really have Plato's and Aristotle's and whatnot. I think that they probably are around, but just not so celebrated because the algorithm buries them. But yeah, you know, that's the trend with exposure to psychedelics, you know, that the monkey mind becomes the Ubermensch, basically. And we see that in the modern era in music, in technology, anywhere you look, where you find genius that has exceeded the time period, there's usually a psychedelic catalyst involved. If you guys have any questions or sub-subjects that you would like to get into, toss them into the chat. So I'm probably not telling you much that you don't know, but this is super important stuff to be aware of, you know, and we'll get into like how important context and everything is as well, because you might ask, well, you know, there's plenty of idiots that take LSD and didn't Ted Bundy and Charles Manson take LSD, you know, why weren't they enlightened and pure and holy and perfect or whatever? And there are good answers, to those questions. I had something else in mind first, though, that I wanted to tackle. Oh, yeah, well, the therapeutic value as well, right? I want to mention also that sometime this week I have an interview with Dr. Rachel Turetsky and Dr. Douglas Wingate, who wrote the book Eighth Circuit Ascension, which is #1 on the alternative psychology book billboard, whatever that is. And it is an absolutely invaluable piece of work. It's based on the work of Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson and Stanislav Grof for the most part. And it has to do with, it's actually very hermetic and Kabbalistic, this model, because you can apply it to the evolution of the species as well as the journey of the individual from the perinatal stage and the influences in the womb through to the highest form of enlightenment. There is even an invisible sephira called chapel perilous. This is a experience that I refer to as the Phoenix process, which has nothing to do with the series of books. I was unaware of that. I just needed a name for this process, and that's what I landed on. So chldbirth is the experience of illumination, basically, and it was really a remarkable thing to read because, I mean, if you guys have seen my videos, if you know the history of the Phoenix process, and you read this chapter on chldbirth, every single thing is mapped out in there. You know, it's really wild. It's also really worthy of noting that we have had academics that have mapped experiences like the Phoenix process or chldbirth like 60 years ago, right? And yet we have like no acknowledgement in the world of psychology up until very, very recently that these type of phenomena are real. And the loss that caused for me, for example, and I can't even imagine a lot of other people that have gone through similar things that are even less equipped than I was, because I did have quite a bit of preparation. It is really just tragic that this kind of knowledge and information has been suppressed. And it definitely is a matter of suppression. So check that book out for sure. Don't miss the interview. Timothy Leary was an extraordinary genius, and he is so underrated and ignored. That is a travesty. You know, everyone should read Neuropolitique and several other of his books. The man had an IQ of like 160 or something, and he truly was the closest thing to a prophet that I think I have ever encountered. And of course, he's gotten a bit of a reputation as a CIA plant or something, which is completely stupid. The source of that actually is he was in prison because he was running for governor, and it looked like he was going to win by a landslide in California. And the feds were like, "Oh no, 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 no," and they busted him with 2 joints in his ashtray. And he said, "I'm Timothy Leary running for governor. There are no joints in my ashtray." They planted him. They gave him 30 years in prison in California. They put him in a cell with Charles Manson at San Quentin, who absolutely loved him. That didn't hurt him any. They thought it would, but it didn't. He was airlifted out under fire with a helicopter by the Weatherman Underground at like 64 or something. And he ran away to Africa and got caught by the CIA, and they brought him back to prison. So when they brought him back to prison, they said, "Well, we want information on all these psychedelic leaders like Allen Ginsberg and, you know, Aldous Huxley and, you know, whoever else." And Tim Leary, being an absolute genius, gave them a bunch of information, but it was all useless. No one was ever charged. As a result of this, they amended the protocol for snitches so that someone has to actually get in trouble before they apply your snitching and let you off. So yeah, I think that's the root of that, you know, that he played the cops to get himself out of prison, but nobody was charged with a single crime because of the information that he gave. So if you thought Leary was a rat, you thought wrong. Already bought the book. Nice. Yeah, it's really amazing to have such a good manual for metaprogramming. The thing is, it's kind of it reads like it's written for academics, so it's not going to be that useful unless you have a high IQ or you're an academic, or you're just really determined, you know, because you're going to have to know the terminology. You're going to have, and if you don't, you know, make sure you have good habits. You got to stop and look stuff up and make sure that you understand what's being communicated. And there's a lot of technical terms and stuff, but it's tremendously important. You know, the stream I'm doing on Wednesday, where I missed an incredible opportunity due to narcissistic parenting and other childhood trauma. You know, if I had had better access to metaprogramming, I might not have made those mistakes, you know, so it's tremendously important. We oftentimes put the cart before the horse, and we don't have a mystery tradition where there's a hierarchy and there are adepts to guide us and to help lead us through chldbirth and whatnot. So, you know, it's actually pretty easy to acquire more power than you can manage. Believe me, I found out the hard way, and if you have too much enthusiasm untempered by wisdom, it's just going to be a shitstorm. You're better off not having the power if you don't have the capacity to make investitures of it. So, speaking of that, LSD as a therapeutic tool. This is an area that is so underserved, and like I was saying about that book, we are getting closer to having the tools that the average person needs to make use of this. But I'll give you an example from my own life of how efficacious metaprogramming with LSD can be. And the mechanism behind it is the enhanced neuroplasticity, which means that your brain is able to make changes, basically. And another way of thinking about this is that psychedelics do indeed raise your consciousness or expand your mind, right? And in order to run a better program, better software, you need better hardware. You can't run a program that's designed for a MacBook on a 1983 Commodore, whatever, I don't know what the hell computers were called back then. I had a Commodore 64, I think, or something. You know what I mean? So if you consider Albert Hoffman's position that LSD was actually had some sort of intelligence, there are all sorts of mechanisms built into it that are eerily convenient. The fact that it stops working, you have to double the dose, and then actually doubling the dose after a few days isn't really going to work as well even. So that's like an anti-abuse mechanism that's built into it. There's a ceiling, right? You can only, I think it's 2,500 micrograms or something. It's either 2,500 or 5,000. I'm pretty sure it's 2,500. But there's a ceiling, so you can't get any higher than that. And people that tell stories about, taking 4 hits and being high for 3 days or something, they're probably every single one of them is lying. It's a story that someone made up, and then other idiots have repeated it, And the reason is that here's the proof. This is a better way of dealing with it. There are 2 cases where I don't know who the hell this was, because a gram of LSD was like $14,000 last time I didn't check on the West Coast. But anyways, I guess he had Molly or something, in both situations, and they dumped out rails, and everyone did a rail, and it was actually LSD crystals. And 1 liquid ounce of LSD is enough for 100,000 strong doses or 300,000 mild ones. So, these rails were estimated to be about 20,000 micrograms. In both cases, there were 5 people in each group. In both cases, they were back to baseline within 12 hours, and there were no major adverse effects. And one of the groups, they checked back in with each person 5 years later, and they hadn't had any flashbacks. There was no problems at all. And they all reported that it was the most important experience of their entire life. So, that's interesting. And then also, if it's true that they expand your consciousness and you need a hardware upgrade in order to accommodate the new program that you're running, the fact that psychedelics have the capacity to enhance neuroplasticity and catalyze neurogenesis is wild, right? Like they were very well engineered, almost too well engineered. Did I go off topic? Sorry, I got a lot on my mind. I feel like that was also going somewhere. Yeah, I remember now. I was giving you an example of the efficacy at assisting in metaprogramming. So I started smoking tobacco when I was 9, I think, and I was 35 or 36 when this happened. I could have done it. It could have been better too because I didn't sleep the night before. I rented a cabin with my girlfriend on the coast, and unbelievably, it was like $675 a night or something. And somebody started a chainsaw at like 6 a.m. right outside the window, and they would not stop. So we got no sleep. So we went to this other hotel and got another cabin. Actually, it wasn't a hotel; it was a cabin. And I don't know what prompted this exactly, but I just thought, you know what, I really got to quit smoking. So rather than go to sleep, I took one hit of LSD, probably like 60 to 100 micrograms, and I had taken it the night before, so not super strong. And I went out on the deck and I did pranayama, the fourfold breath. And the reason the fourfold breath is so effective, a couple of reasons. For one thing, 4 is the number of stability. So when you do a hermetic ritual and you are creating your microcosm, the first thing you do after casting a circle is to identify 4 corners. And this is the basis, the foundation for your universe. So the breath is symbolic of life. To master the breath is to master your life. So you focus on mastering the breath, and you inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale until all of the breath is all the way gone from the bottom of your diaphragm, or pushing it all out. You know, it's not in your diaphragm, but you know what I mean, until there's nowhere to go. And keep distended, right? So on the inhale, you are inundating the brain with oxygen, which is feeding the cells, you know, giving them the fuel that they need to actually take advantage of the neurogenesis potential that has been conferred by the LSD. And when you are keeping it distended, you are depriving. And this sort of accelerates you into, or accelerates your transition into other states of consciousness. So on the inhale, I'm thinking, I'm not going to smoke anymore. And then on the exhale, just kind of feeling the feelings that you associate with, you know, the negative aspect of this habit, you know. And I did this for maybe an hour. I doubt it was more than an hour. And the next day, I didn't remember that I was a smoker until I found my tobacco pouch in my pocket at like 7:30 at night. And I would have rolled a cigarette almost first thing. And now today, you know, I smoke a little bit of mapacho here and there, but I'm definitely not a habitual smoker by any stretch of the imagination. Some of that has to do with ayahuasca work later, because the new research on addiction has shown us that, you know, I think this was always obvious, that if you remove the roots, if you move the addiction by the roots, in other words, you find the traumas that capitulated the addiction in the first place, and you integrate or dissolve, or however this particular trauma needs to be worked out, if you do that, then your addictive behavior will cease. And for sure, I have experienced evidence of that, because when I was younger, I did have physical addiction to opioids for quite a long time, and definitely went overboard with a lot of different drugs and whatnot. And since, you know, 15 years ago or something, I can dabble, and there's no temptation to do anything habitually or go overboard, or, you know, because I have lifted up the hood and taking care of the wiring under the board. And when you do that, you are actually, if it's been done well, you are actually a normal, healthy person again. The whole NA and AA model, I think, is super damaging to people. So anyways, you know, that's one great example of this. But you can do it with any type of addiction. You can do it with any sort of proactive pattern that you need to inculcate into your being. You can use LSD to enhance learning and creativity tremendously, especially if you play music. But earlier I had mentioned that, people point out that not everyone that takes psychedelics has these kind of positive changes, right? And there's a number of reasons for that, but the simple fundamental thing is that if you do not have the specific attention and also the discipline and the willpower to actually do the work of dissolving an old pattern or inculcating a new one, engineering a new one, it's just not going to happen. I knew an LSD chemist back in the day, and his political indoctrination is so intense that it's insane. And all of the other positive influences that you could derive from taking a ton of acid your whole life, he was very deep, super intelligent, probably genius level, but his political indoctrination was not loosened at all. So the reality is a person has to specifically have the intention to neutralize, any kind of imprint that doesn't serve them, And that's one of the problems we're seeing right now, that people, if you want to just be more what you are, then ayahuasca and LSD and psilocybin will only amplify your personality traits. Every now and then it will just force you to realize something that you don't want to realize. But I think that there's a sort of instinctual block there, because as a facilitator for many years, I noticed pretty quickly that the overwhelming majority of negative experiences with psychedelics involve this tendency that people have to try to cling to their shadow. And what happens is, it's the deeper and the longer this situation has persisted, the worse it is. But people come to identify with these shadow aspects that don't serve them and may even be destroying them, eating them alive. And when it comes time to shine the light in the place where you have refused or been unable to look, there is a sort of panic, a dread. You even feel that you're being killed because this component of your identity is being threatened. And you may even consciously know that this aspect of self doesn't serve you and is extremely problematic, and still cling to it for dear life, So it's not even just that a person needs to be guided, but they have to have the genuine intention to release their demons. Otherwise, psychedelics, there probably still will be some benefit. The person will be more interesting afterwards. It might alleviate some depression, but there are certain parameters that we have to agree to operate within if we're really trying to become completely liberated and sovereign and illuminated. Check in with the chat again, see what's up. Veterans group, what is your opinion on microdosing LSD? Good question. Can good LSD be found in Peru? I have no idea. I would imagine so, somewhere. Okay, microdosing, huh? Microdosing has in a study. First of all, you have to understand what placebo is. A lot of people have some confusion about this. Placebo doesn't mean it doesn't work. Placebo means that your mind, it works for real, but not any more than your mind and just belief will, So in most of the studies I've seen, microdosing is no different than placebo in the control group. However, if you take, I guess it's called a threshold dose, and if you rub your fingers together and your nerves are noticeably more sensitized, then you're there. So it's still not like a strongly psychoactive dose. You're not going to be tripping. But if you get to that threshold dose, then yeah, you're going to experience some benefits in terms of enhanced neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, and depression probably improved a little bit and whatnot. Another thing that you can do that will drastically increase your ability to get benefit from all psychedelics is to take colloidal gold. The smaller the angstrom size, the better. I think Atlantis Alchemy has the smallest because they use a laser to blast them to little itty bitty bits. But it stores in the brain, and it's a superconductor that's activated by light. And studies have shown that it is so efficacious at healing the brain and facilitating just better function that people that have psychosis from syphilis have been brought back into homeostasis with colloidal gold alone. So if you're a person that doesn't want to take large doses, or whatever your reasoning is, you can drastically enhance the gains by taking colloidal gold. And you can just take a shot every morning on an empty stomach for a month or six weeks, and then repeat like once a year, because it actually stores in the brain where it belongs. Quite remarkable and wonderful. Where were we going with all this? We talked about addiction, anxiety, and if you're a person that has severe PTSD or anxiety and you may have a negative reaction to LSD, you can get a lot of the same benefits from ketamine. A lot of people don't like to hear that because they associate it with the rave scene, and people call it like psychedelic smack even. But don't be dumb. Don't take it all the time, But it is extremely efficacious for PTSD and anxiety in particular, and it will confer the same benefits as psychedelics generally, without having to risk an anxiety type reaction. Alrighty. Questions, comments? Yeah, I know my mic is popping. It's driving me nuts too. Well, this might be a short stream. I just basically thought I can't let Mr. Hoffman down and not do my annual bicycle stream. But really, there's only so much that you can say about these compounds. About this particular compound, and most of it is pretty common knowledge now, which is really wonderful. The acceptance of psychedelics. I mean, you have no idea, as an advocate, as a teenager, because right away I actually started researching psychedelics before I ever took any, in like 6th grade or something on accident. I just stumbled across this book called Flowering Plants that had slipped into the elementary school library on accident, I guess. And I became fascinated with them, and so I was speaking positively about them in the early mid 90s, whatever. And people would laugh at me and tell me I was an idiot, and you got a really negative reaction for telling people that these were useful tools. I always took them for that reason, even as a kid. The first LSD trip, I think I was 14 or 15. And I remember the first or second time I looked at my friend and I said, I think you could treat any psychological aberration with these compounds, you know, and people just thought I was retarded. You know, so it's wild to see. If you guys, a lot of you guys that follow me are younger, you know, and you missed the drug war hysteria to a large extent. But it's actually really quite the pleasant surprise to see that people have opened up a bit, you know. There are plenty of issues, however. You know, we have one major obstacle, in my opinion, is that people are not in a big hurry to let go of their political indoctrination. You know, it's really insane right now in the United States. You can show people on either side of the aisle proof of some, you know, evil connected to their preferred political douchebag, and they will literally just act like it doesn't exist. You know, we experienced this on the left with both Biden and Harris, where, you know, Biden had to drop out of the race against Obama because he said, come on, man, a clean, well-educated black man, you just don't see that. That's why he dropped out of that race for making that comment. He eulogized the Klan leader, saying that he was a friend and mentor. And they were like, you know, the left is like, we got to get this racist out of the White House and put this racist in. Like, what the fuck, man? And then, you know, Kamala Harris called Biden a racist and a rapist. He's a black woman. You know, 2 weeks later, she's like honored to be running beside him or whatever, you know. And then now Donald Trump, he was supposed to be bringing freedom back to the U.S. and stopping censorship and all this stuff. And compliance with government requests for censorship has gone up 21% since the pandemic. During the pandemic, it was not as bad as it is now. You know, and of course, if you're on the right and your rhetoric is his preferred flavor, then you feel like you have free speech. But, you know, and then when they sent the girls up into space the other day, there was some bill passed that like you can't refuse forced medical treatments in the United States. No more peaceful assembly. Something about criticizing. I can't remember, but basically free speech. You know, like and what human rights? They changed the definition. So they can basically do anything to anyone. I mean, it's insane, you know. It's exactly as I've been predicting for the last 6 years, by the way. Go back and watch my older videos, and I've been laying all this out. Like, this is what's coming, and it doesn't take a genius or a prophet. You just have to map the trajectory. You know, it's been on the same trajectory, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, going the same exact fucking way. So, you know what I mean? That is our biggest obstacle. That's really the only thing left between the human race, at least in the United States and a lot of other places as well, and a truly habitable, sensible world that is truly engineered to support the best in people and to maximize human potential. And, you know, it's actually not very difficult to ascertain, especially with AI. You know, if we can engineer one that is guaranteed to be objective and ask it, what is the best solution to world hunger? What is the best economic system truly? Like, you know, you feed it your parameters and it will give you an algorithm. You know, these answers are available and easy, really. There are nations that have really good systems that have been working for quite a long time, you know, and you're not hearing about that in the United States. What they do is they feed them wedge issues, and these are the things we're arguing about, and they are not the fundamental problems in society and in culture, but that's where they're going to keep your focus so that you don't start thinking about those things. And I'll give you a little hint as to why that is. You know, the big problems that do not serve the overlords, the solutions do not serve their purposes, the answers are actually pretty easy to see. And if you think I'm wrong, tell me why it is that they're putting so much energy into keeping people focused on wedge issues. You know, that's it. The proof is in the pudding. So, you know, if we don't dissolve that circumstance, the rigidity that people have in terms of political indoctrination, LSD isn't going to do us a lot of good. You know what I mean? This is a major, major complication. I have my entire life been expecting that in my lifetime humanity would wake up, that they would realize that the institutionalized religions were all traps, that the political systems were lies, et cetera, because it's not really that hard to see, for example. You know what I mean? And we were heading there. We're getting there. You know, the potential is still there. But there are people that have a vested interest in that sort of paradigm not emerging. You know, so we have oppression even of scientific knowledge that's emerging that suggests that a universal mind is almost a certainty, that consciousness is all pervasive in the universe, and, you know, all sorts of things that if people knew would dissolve the systems of control that are in place, and the house of cards comes tumbling down. Like, this is real. This is the moment that we're experiencing. And the reality is that the coin can only fall two ways. One of them is utter destruction, and the other is a liberated, illuminated planet. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, for getting us halfway there. You know, that substance, I truly believe, did more to create the potential that the human race might actually successfully metamorphosize. And the potential, watch my stream on Wednesday, you know, the potential is almost inconceivable for a truly liberated, healthy human race. And it's not this lofty, naive fantasy that a lot of people dismiss it as. It's never going to be perfect. But as I was saying, the very fact that they have to put so much energy into distraction and fear and propaganda is proof of what I'm saying. Because if it wasn't, they wouldn't need to do that. Howdy, Judge. How are you doing? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me for an hour on Bicycle Day. And tomorrow, I'm doing the music stream. I'm going to force myself to do it. It's been extremely difficult to process this thing that I sort of resurrected in my brain a week ago. I'm still dazed and like I can like in and out of listlessness and stuff. Like, it's pretty bad. It's not an easy one. And honestly, it's something that I think could haunt me until the day I die, every single day of my life. But I have a plan to at least, how do you say, like, I can't find the word, alleviate some of that. Hope it works. You guys can help. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll hopefully see you tomorrow.